Hello, Simone. Today, we are going to come up with a hypothesis for how the Democrats can win the next election cycle, how they can fix the downward spiral, because they are losing in every demographic. They are losing in women. They are losing in Black men and women. They are losing in every younger generation. Both men and women is voting more conservatively every generation at this point. It is bad for Dems. They are losing hard in the Hispanic population. Kamala did worse than Biden in literally every state. And I think one of the key things is that both parties have an extremist problem. On the right, there were some people, extremist is the wrong way to put it. Some people who embody the negative stereotype that the other party paints that party as having. So in the right, we paint the left as being these crazy wokeists, and on the left, they paint us as being crazy racists. As we pointed out in the last video, the crazy racists all left the right, denounce Trump, and want nothing to do with him and say they feel uncomfortable at right-wing rallies now. Yay for us. We sucked out the venom, spit it in a toilet.
If you didn't watch that video, we point out that almost every mainstream right-wing voice that had racist tendencies or anti-Semitic tendencies or homophobic tendencies came out, denounced Trump, and asked their supporters not to vote for him. So when Trump came into office, he came in without the support of this community. And this wasn't just a thing within the influencer classes. We can actually see this within the data. Between the first time he was elected and this time he was elected, Trump did worse with white men. Where he exploded in popularity was with Black men and Hispanic men, at least when you're contrasting between election cycles. And I think a large part of this was because the way that we have been talking about the immigrant crisis is no longer in racist terms, but in terms of simple economics. And if you look at the counties where the difference in voting was the most this election cycle, they are the counties that were overwhelmingly Hispanic. The Dems thought this demographics is destiny thing, we can just increase the number of minorities in this country and we'll win forever. And they thought that this plan would work for them. In the meantime, Trump has been building his support within the very communities the Democrats thought they had on lock, with things like the Hispanic community moving in a direction where they might become a majority Republican voting bloc in the near future. This is an existential crisis for Democrats. This is something that was only possible because Trump took the Republican Party's version of the woke population, the extremists who represent the negative stereotype that the other party paints of the Republican Party, and made the party unpalatable to them. The left hasn't been able to do this with their woke extremists.
The left, they've got a problem because they have platformed these people. These people own their rallies. These people own the foot soldiers of their events. Meanwhile, we got rid of any racist foot soldiers we had, any homophobic foot soldiers we have, and who did we replace them with? Wholesome paragons of humanity like Scott Presler, right? So let's talk about one, and I think this is really interesting. I'm going to play a piece here from the New York Times podcast, and it's going to go over their analysis of what they did wrong, their analysis of what they need to change, and I think it shows how bad things are. So the first thing they're going to go over here is they're going to say we need to make this about class struggle again, while remembering that the lower classes are only Black people and women, and Black women mostly.
So what happens now to the Democratic coalition? Where do we go from here? You know, does depolarization by race and by class and by gender and by geography, does that create opportunities?
Thank you for putting it that way. I think one of the challenges that the Democratic Party has is that they are going to have to rediscover the language of class, and not what class meant in the 1960s, but the understanding that really the working class today are women and women of color. And so, building a new factory actually is not responding to their economic needs.
Sorry, I want to hear your reaction to this because this is insane.
So the whole hillbilly elegy, forgotten American class is not considered poor, even if they're dying from deaths of despair and they're losing jobs and their communities are crumbling. They don't
No,
count.
the woman who said this should have been said, if the left was operating the way the right did now, she said, the other person on the show, because this woman was a Black person arguing for her own self-interest, you are a bigot, you are a racist, and you need to like address whether or not your beliefs are based in ethno-supremacy or any sort of tie to reality. Because it sounds like you're arguing from a position of ethno-supremacy. Only your people matter.
Yeah.
Because this is a Black woman saying this. When in reality, the reason they lost is because of this form of racism that they, and bigotry that they, and so they'll say, oh, it's not racism. Well, it's bigotry at least. That anyone could think that in America, class was a race-based thing when you know that this woman got major benefits in her life. And this is one of these things. People are like, Kamala wasn't woke. Why didn't she win? This is like an important question the left needs to engage with. Why didn't Kamala win despite being not woke? Because she didn't attack the systemic and racist system that wokeism set up.
Right.
Kamala should have gone on stage and said, I know that I achieved this position of the nomination due to a systemically unfair system. If I was white or I was a man, I would not have this position. That throughout my entire life, I have had advantages that other people in this country can only dream of. And that is why I have this position of power. And I am humble in the face of all of the systemic pressures that gave me an advantage over people who are working.
But she would not have been able to argue that without drawing serious attack, because her behavior in the past has shown her willingness to exercise her privilege while throwing systemically underprivileged people like jailed populations under the bus.
Yeah, and I need to point out here, when I say that Black people have systemic privilege, I'm talking about Black middle class and upper class people. Black lower class people are still pretty fucked in this country. And by people like Kamala, who, by the way, left a huge population in prison, Black population in prison. She knew the crime lab had been compromised, but she wanted to win an election cycle. She didn't care about them because the Black middle class and upper class in this country sees the Black lower class as scum, as inhuman. She doesn't care about leaving them in jail. She doesn't care about them being shot on the street. She doesn't care about their businesses being burned down. You know, her
running mate's wife opening her windows to smell the smoke. Yeah.
Being burned and being like, well, at least they're having this little celebration, the BLM celebration. It's disgusting. They don't care about the damage that they do to these communities because they don't see them as mattering, because all of the systemic privileges that they have fought for are only accrued by middle and upper class Black individuals. And I think that most of the Black world has fucking figured this out by now. And that even if you are a hardworking middle or upper class Black individual, that these systems end up backfiring for you. Because they make everyone think that you got everything you did based on privilege. And people who are like, oh, Kamala isn't the DEI candidate. Biden literally said, I will only hire a woman POC for this position. That means that she was given not just a massive systemic advantage, but a systemic advantage of the level of Irish need not apply. Like, huge, huge, huge. Now, the next thing you hear, so I'm going to play more from the New York Times here. So now they're going to talk about how she's a professor and she goes and she tries to brainwash her students, and she herself was brainwashed by a professor of hers into believing that what they need to fight for and what the Democrats need to fight for is things like reparations.
So we're going to have a lot of people listening to this who are really down in the dumps, disappointed by the results and wondering where to go next. I mean, I'm curious, like, what are you going to tell your students are going to ask you this, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to tell them? And what would you tell our listeners and readers?
I think maybe I would tell them both the same thing, because I think in moments like this, we're all kind of students in the sense that we are looking for someone to help us make sense of the world. And what I have said to them before, and what I will say to them in class on Tuesday, if they are listening, is, you know how to do this. You may not believe you know how, right? But you actually have already done this. We have lived through this once before. That is not to say that there is not a great existential threat and danger. I think there is, and I've always thought there was. But I always think it's important to remember something my mentor told me years ago. When I would be despondent about, like, reparations programs or something, and I'd go, this thing is never going to happen, right? And he said to me, yeah, That's what they once said about ending slavery, Tressie. You know, the thing is, you don't know your moment in history until it's long gone. So you can't treat things like you know your moment in history. You really do have to operate as if tomorrow is happening.
Totally.
So if you want to feel empowered to do something, know that history actually is only written after the things are settled, and it is our job to settle them.
So wait, the New York Times journalist is also a professor, and she's arguing that they didn't fight enough for things like reparations?
Yes. That they need to, one day reparations will be a reality. Now we know
But reparations don't help people.
Yeah, we know now from the UBI study where they gave people $1,000 a month for 3 years, and they were at the end of it $30,000 poorer than the people who didn't get this. Giving people big cash payments hurts them. It hurts their communities. It permanently disables their communities.
If you're just joining us, black people got their reparations checks today, and in short, all hell is broken loose.
I think what everyone wants to know now is, what are you going to do with all this money?
I'm going to reinvest my money into the community.
Oh, that's a very nice gesture. What were you saying? Is that your son?
No, I just bought this baby cash.
But it's absolutely accurate to sketch, as everybody knows this is what's going to happen if you give a big cash handout to the current black communities. Like, it's a cultural problem that needs to be fixed. It's not a they don't have enough money problem. There are other cultures that came to the U.S. that had no money, were historically disenfranchised, like, let's say, the Chinese, for example, or the Japanese, who recently had literally everything taken from them, much more recently than the black people, and starting from scratch after the period of internment during World War II, have built back a strong culture. That's not the cause of the difference. The cause of the difference is internal to the culture, which can be seen if you go to our video about the zombification of black culture. Black culture didn't used to be like this. You go to the 1960s, blacks had half the rate of white people, kids outside of wedlock.
To be more specific, only 5% of black children were born out of wedlock, while 10% of white children were born out of wedlock. Today, the number is around 70% of black children are born out of wedlock. Progressives destroyed black culture, ripped it apart. And what we see now is the shreds of it. And it is always gross to me when I see something like BLM being like, well, nuclear families, that's not a black thing. That's a white thing. I'm like, no, it used to be twice as black a thing as it is a white thing, historically speaking. This changed when a Marxist group took over the civil rights movement. See our video with Curtis Yarvin for an explanation of how that happened.
Yeah, there were essentially black culture was showing better metrics in terms of how we judge culture, which is imparting fitness, creating resilient, successful people who have kids and raise those kids to be resilient and successful. It was doing better. Yeah.
And the wokeism that targeted black culture first, because it took ownership of it. And unfortunately, and I'll admit, at the beginning, I think that there might have been truth to Democrats really supporting black culture more for a period in American history. That is definitely no longer.
I mean, I sometimes question this. I feel like a lot of the big thing now, the more that I look at it, it seems to be that well-intentioned people who just weren't part of the culture decided to, in a very white saviory kind of way, take ownership of, I'm going to help this disadvantaged group that was already helping itself. And then it kind of like when you introduce exogenous hormones to a body, that body will stop its own internal production, and it can really throw everything off. And that's not great. And I think that might be kind of what happened, is they're like, let's introduce hormone therapy.
Well,
and then like the whole body got out of it.
I see a level of malevolence even during that period. So you have the founder of,
well, I guess you have the Planned Parenthood thing, but I think
hold on. So for people who don't know this story, we've done another video on it, but I'll just quickly go over it. Planned Parenthood was started by somebody with strong ties to the KKK with an explicit plan to wipe out black people in the United States, well, low genetic quality people. And she thought black people were disproportionately in this category. This is admitted on the Planned Parenthood website. This is not something of controversy. Right now, this is also not a point of controversy. There is the black population of the United States would be a quarter larger than it is if Planned Parenthood didn't exist.
Yeah, it's the biggest genocide that no one talks about.
83% of Planned Parenthood clinics are still in majority Black neighborhoods. So
I
Black
shouldn't laugh, actually.
communities,
It's really not funny.
when they started rolling this out, didn't want this. And so she went to Black Democratic community leaders to get them to talk to their communities and staff these clinics with majority Black workers to try to get more Black people in. And this was done. The sterilization and genocide of their own communities was done by, what's the nice way to put this? House isn't the nice way to put this, but I think a class of this like Black middle class and upper class that Kamala belongs to, and the Black community talks about as like the ruling whatever, trying to keep all other Black people down. And like, I don't think they're wrong about this impression. I mean, it's not like 10 super rich Black people who have sold out, but it like basically is. There is a Black community that has completely sold out the Black underclass. And I think that's why 25%, by the way, it was 25% of Black men voted for Trump in this election cycle from like 8% in previous cycles. Like they're waking up. They know what's up now.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'll keep playing it.
I think Donald Trump is not the last gasp of the GOP's descent into chaos and madness, but he is a sign that the only strategy they only have one tool. If there's an upside today, is that, yeah, the tool worked this time, but they only have one, right?
Yeah.
That means there is plenty of opportunity here to build more and better tools, and that's our job right now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Tressie.
So then the next thing she goes on about is she goes on and she says Republicans are only winning because of one thing. But she doesn't specify what it is, which is really
really?
Yeah, so I've come up with a few hypotheses. She might be thinking it's racism. The problem is that more Black people are voting for Republicans. More Arabs
Definitely not
racist.
racist. Well, no, she could believe that, because she could believe, and this was something that came up near the end of the election cycle, that the Black men and Latino men, etc., were racist, and they were voting out of racism. No. These accusations came up. Absolutely. I mean, the whole Obama thing is you're misogynist and all these other. No. I really think that they may think it is racism, and that
Yeah, continue.
Go ahead.
Oh no, you had something to say. I was gonna.
Well, I think I've seen enough coverage of the whole postmortem, the leftist postmortem of the election, that they genuinely believe that the non-white groups,
that they believe this. What I'm saying is it's just obviously factually inaccurate.
Oh no, yeah, no, obviously it's not accurate, but it's what they believe.
All the mainstream racists hate Trump now. All of the minority ethnic groups are voting more for Republicans than they ever have.
Yeah, no, it's not true, but I think that's what she was thinking, because I can't imagine what else she was thinking.
So the next thing she thinks is it could be feminism, like oh, we hate women, we don't want a woman president. Except more women voted for Trump in this election than they did when he was running against Biden.
It was definitely not that. And also that just never came up in the election. It just was never discussed. And Kamala, she never played up her femininity, really. So I definitely don't see that.
So then the last thing it could be is she means it's the economy. But like, if it's the economy, it just shows how disconnected this Democratic elite is. It's like all the people care about is they can't afford food for their families. Like, how selfish be they not vote for our ideological agenda just because they can't?
That would be the most non-evil assumption on her part, though. I hope that's what she believed, because that's factual. When the economy does poorly, the ruling administration is more likely to be voted out. That is, and so that would be the most realistic thing, I think, for her to say.
I'd also point out, and I think this is really interesting, that like, if she's like, oh, they're only winning on one thing, and they're just running the same thing over and over again, like, she's acting like when Trump is gone, that the party is going to be easier to beat. And I'm like, no, you nut jobs. When the party is gone, we've got JD Vance and effing Scott Presler in the wings here. When Trump is gone, you've got fucking nothing, except for one person who I'm going to bring up at the end of this, and I think could clinch it for the Democrats.
Ooh.
But
Michelle Obama? She'd never run.
No. You're not thinking of them. And as soon as I mention who it
Dwayne
is,
The Rock Johnson.
No. As soon as I mention, you're going to be like, oh my God, this would be the perfect person. He would win.
I'm excited for this.
He would win.
In the comments, weigh in. Don't cheat. Place your bets.
Okay, so I'll see if I give it away in the title card or something like that. But what I'm pointing out is that, Simone, you had to talk about the thing you did with GPT, where you're trying to figure out like who's going to be the next Democratic frontrunner for the next election cycle.
You must be thinking of someone else.
No, you were like, I asked it who's going to be good to win the next election cycle, and
This
it
is
couldn't come up
you're
with anyone.
inventing, or sometimes you talk to other people and you think that you're talking to me in your memories. I did not do this.
Okay, well, whoever I was talking to said they went on AI and they're like, who's going to be the next person to run for Democratic office?
Okay.
And it gave a list of people. And then
Mhm.
I asked AI, I said, I've never heard of any of these people before. They seem like small players. And the
Okay.
AI said in response, yeah, the Democrats have a problem.
That's great.
Whoever it was,
The AI, that's on purpose.
they do
Oh
have
my
a problem,
gosh,
whereas we
dude.
are spoiled for choice. And I think
Yeah.
it's due to Trump's incredibly shrewd choice of JD Vance as his running mate. Now, what I want to point out here to understand the Democrats' loss, I think this is a key thing, and why it's going to be so hard for them going forwards,
Hmm.
is they were not running on policy positions. They weren't even really running on vibes. They were running on an alternate fictional reality. And by this, what I mean is Kamala's two core talking points. And this is what I get from Democratic analysis, who are like analysts who were looking at this and saying, okay, how is she doing? What'd she do wrong? What'd she do? Like, she really only had 2 points if you examine all of her speeches. One is Trump is going to force abortion restrictions on everyone in this country.
Oh yeah, all your rights will be taken away.
All your abortion. But Trump said he'd veto any national abortion restriction. Like,
That's
he's
right.
literally pro-choice. He
Yeah.
did that in his last term and he overturned Roe versus Wade. But Roe versus Wade isn't even about like abortion restrictions. It's about a weird thing the Supreme Court did that was like obviously illegal constitutionally speaking. And
Mhm.
anyone who knows law knows it was illegal. The Supreme Court should have been able to make this decision, and they did it. And you know what I'm talking about, right? Like Roe versus Wade was basically a
Oh,
legal
yes.
decision being
Yeah.
made by the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and that's not the way our Constitution was set up.
Yeah.
You're supposed to pass this
He's
at the
correcting a bug in the code or a grammatical inaccuracy. Yeah.
Yeah, this wasn't. I don't even see it as an abortion issue. I just see it as a basic like
Yeah, like you didn't
non-mechanical.
do this right. Like if you want to do this, there's a way to do it, and you didn't do it right.
Yeah. And so Trump, so one, this is a fiction, but then the bigger fiction is that Trump is going to, like, all black people are going to wake up as slaves. Everyone who's not like a cis white male is going to end up without any rights, that women are going to be forced to the Mar-a-Lago breeding pens. And like, this is just not reality. And I think we have seen such negative consequences from the Democratic framing here. Not only do we have the Trump assassination attempts, but you don't know about this, Simone, and I know you'll be unhappy to learn about
There was
this.
another Iranian plot that was thwarted too.
Well, yeah, Iran has a right to be afraid of a Trump presidency, but
Yes.
so there was a guy who killed his wife, his ex-wife, and
Oh,
two
I
kids.
saw that in the UK though.
Well, in the UK?
I thought it was even in the UK. Maybe it was just I read it in the Daily Mail or something.
No, I think it was Minnesota. So, and he said, quote, "My mental health and the world can no longer peacefully coexist. And a lot of the reason is religion. I am terrified of the religious zealots inflicting their misguided beliefs on me and my family. I have intrusive thoughts of being burned at the stake as a witch or crucified on a burning cross." So he thought the religious community, and this is the thing. I tried to find this story in the US. I could only find it in UK and Indian newspapers.
Okay, so that's why I thought it was. Sorry, that's why I was.
I found accounts of it happening in the US. They were like, crazy guy kills his family. They did not say it was because the left convinced him that his family wouldn't be safe.
That it was Trump derangement syndrome.
It reminds me so much of that scene in Downfall. Excellent movie, by the way. You should watch it, about the downfall of the Nazi versus regime, where as soon as they realize they're not in power, one woman kills her family because, like, you haven't seen Downfall?
I'm not watching people kill their families. No.
By the way, not putting. I looked at the clip and I was like, "Oh, I'm mentioning a clip. I should probably add it like I do when I mention other clips." And I watched it and I was like, nobody wants to see this right now. Like, if you want to feel terrible, you can go look up the clip. But I think it's just more proof of the left is just Nazis. They just act like Nazis. They think like Nazis. It's fucking insane. And the people who don't see it yet, my God, wait till they come for you. That's what I guess I have to say. Actually, the wait till they come for you thing has been a major thing for me recently, where a lot of people have come to me and they're like, I didn't know that this could get me canceled and ruin my career, and now it's happened to me. And all of the people who I went and I talked to about what I thought was a fairly normal thing, they won't even listen to me. They're like, well, I haven't been canceled yet, so I'm fine. And if you're like, well, cancellation is nothing like, putting you in a concentration camp. And it's like, yeah, well, maybe, but having your only means of income taken away when you've got like a family of 5 kids, that's a pretty big deal. And they do it so flippantly and with so much joy.
What are you finger painting?
A bear?
Ein bear? And bear has nothing to do with accepting people of different races.
I didn't know what else to paint.
Start value. Go. Faster. 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 Are you done? What is it? What have you done?
People of all colors and creeds holding hands beneath a rainbow.
Good. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now do it again.
Very
Not my
powerful movie. I suggested. I'm gonna make.
I can't even watch like the one clip where his like hands are shaking and he adjusts his glasses.
That's such a great clip. So many good take. Look, there's some movies that kids just need to watch. Downfall is one. Kids, I think, very good education. Fievel is, I think, the classic American cartoon. All kids need to see An American Tail, and then Fievel Goes West.
Pardon, but did you say never? So young and you have lost hope? Oh, this is America, the place to find the hope. Hope for the best, work for the rest, and never say never again. Take my little friend to immigration. Everyone goes through immigration.
Absolutely top tier cinema. Great at I think building American pride, showing that we are a nation of national clans working together and cultural clans working together against the oligarchs which control the Democratic Party. One of the crazy things I've seen as an outcome of this is they're like, Elon gave Trump all of this money and now he's going to control Trump because billionaires. And I was like, bitch, Kamala raised 3 times what Trump raised.
Yeah, seriously.
Giving her that money. Like, you live in an alternate fictional reality. And I think that that's one of the problems that they have is they are arguing not based on policy, but that we live in this alternate world where Trump is a fascist. And one of the things I pointed out, which is so insane, is now they're going through all this stuff about how Trump is going to like have like these frivolous lawsuits against his opponents and arrest them. And meanwhile, they'll say the felon Trump.
Yeah. Who they actively and very successfully.
Why is he a felon? No, wait, hold on. Why is he a felon? And they go, because he didn't label his prostitute hush money payments as prostitute hush money payments. And I'm like, yeah, obviously he didn't do that. Obviously.
You're supposed to, Malcolm, you're supposed to label them. It's the law. Don't you understand anything?
I bet Kamala's husband didn't label them when he was paying off the nanny that he knocked up. Which, by the way, those
are child care payments, Malcolm. They're a tax write-off. Shut your mouth.
The left completely covered up that story. You know, he was told by his lawyer to do this, and it wasn't even, it was only a felony because it was supposed to be a misdemeanor, but they said it was to cover up another crime. What was the other crime?
Like chose one. It was a choose your own adventure kind of court case, which was
the choose your own adventure
kind. Yeah.
Okay. So now I want to go over what I think might be causing this and allowing the left to do this, to create this alternate reality, and why it's losing so hard. It's that there is a movement right now to disconnect yourself from reality. And so
it's not a movement. It is a next step in human civilization that's a part of our downfall. So if you've seen or read Ready Player One, you're sort of looking at this universe in which people are living in these like stacked apartments in really urbanized zones, like even stacked trailer parks, just spending all of their day on the internet, working online and socializing online. And there's no real connection with reality. There's no strong connection with your community. And it seems so sci-fi and dystopian, and yet that happened this summer. That the tipping point was this summer, and we're able to live in these weird delusional siloed worlds because we're literally like a huge swath of the population is not leaving their house. So it's totally possible to live in this fantasy and to come to believe these things because you're not literally transacting within society. You're door dashing. You're getting everything delivered via Amazon. You're not having kids. You're not forced to interact with people in that environment. Are the kids playing outside on the driveway?
Yeah, and he went to stop some people who are walking by our house to have a conversation with him.
Of course he did. But yeah, so you're not interacting with the community, and that will cause you to be capable of falling into deeper and deeper delusions.
Well,
and
no, I mean,
that
the
happened
left
this summer.
created this crazy cult, which has had such an easy time creating this alternate reality for people because they're not engaging. So I'm gonna go over some like tweets here, right? So like,
Okay.
okay, here's a Reddit post. I am in a committed relationship with my bed. It understands me, supports my Netflix habits, and never argues about who finished the last of the ice cream. Or another person here. People ask what my hobbies are, and I say rotting in bed with my shows and minding my business. And then another person said, great minds think alike. And then here is another post where somebody's like, I'm kind of tired of all this, to be honest. Brat Summer is just about watching rich people have fun. And it's a picture of
It
like
was the first parasocial party burnout summer where no one actually could afford to party or go out or like had the desire to go out and hit the club. It was more like whatever it is that young people do when they're having a rough Kesha kind of evening and morning. But it was the first time when that was entirely parasocial, but people were still trying to get the social cachet of it. And that parasocial burnout of like, I'm a wreck wasn't from partying hard. It was from literally not being able to take care of yourself and not get out of bed.
Yeah. So how do you win? How do you win as a leftist, right?
Okay. And how do you win?
The way that you win, and this is what all the left are getting wrong. They're like, we need to go harder into identity politics, everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do what the right did to our racists. You need to turn the wokes against you. You need to go out with a crucifix and scare the vampires from the room. You need to call out the wokies on their bullshit. When they lie, you need to say, and this is how Trump won. Like, if you're like, the right didn't have to do this. Trump's first election cycle, he was like, oh yeah, the Iraq war, that was dumb as hell. Like, meanwhile, like Kamala's like butting up with like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, right? You know, taking them on campaign trail with her, saying they were like great public servants. And Trump's like, yeah, that was a cluster. Like, why did we do that? I said at the time.
I just love the way he looks at international politics from the perspective of like, was this a good deal or was this a bad deal? Like, he's looking at like, were we paying too much for this? It's just
called like mainstream Republicans weak. He's like, you guys are being manipulated like this. So, and people could be like, but a mainstream leftist figure could not survive if they did this. I disagree.
Okay, how?
I'm gonna see if you can think of. The person I am thinking of is not in politics. They are a mainstream leftist media comedian, and they are a male.
Jon Stewart.
Jon Stewart.
Oh, and he even looks presidential.
Could Jon Stewart not clean an election cycle's fucking clock?
Yeah, actually.
So I'm gonna put a clip on screen of him right now of Jon Stewart calling out leftist media for bullshitting people about like Trump panic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There was one story that was so disturbing, so dark. Even the news couldn't handle it.
In our editorial discussions this morning, we were asked not to show the image from this video.
Video, which we are intentionally choosing not to show you.
We're not going to show because of how disturbing it is.
I was extremely disturbed to see this.
Horrible, horrible, violent imagery.
Violent and dehumanizing imagery.
We're only going to show you a clip of this briefly.
All right, that's enough. Let's take it down.
I didn't get to see it at all. News channels show images from Ukraine, from Gaza, from natural disasters. They get through them dispassionately. I can't imagine how devastating this footage must be.
Former President Donald Trump shared a video, this one, on his Truth Social account featuring an image of President Joe Biden hogtied on the back of a pickup truck.
That's what was so disturbing and dehumanizing. You wouldn't show it on television and an airbrushed Biden decal on the back of a truck? Aren't you the same networks that show reruns of 9/11 every year?
And now, hold on. Now I want to put out one where he was on Stephen Colbert when the Wuhan lab leak thing was going on.
Oh, no.
And this was when all the left was still like dogmatically like, oh, Wuhan lab leak. And he was like, this is fucking... Obviously, it was a lab leak. Like, what are you talking about? They even called it like COVID labs.
So he could bring the sanity back to the left.
The suffering of this pandemic, which was more than likely caused by science.
Hold on, what's that?
No. Now, listen.
Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like there's a chance that this was created in a lab? I'd love to hear it.
Novel respiratory coronavirus overtaking Wuhan, China. What do? Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan Novel Respiratory Coronavirus Lab. The disease is the same name as the lab. And then they asked the scientists, wait a minute, you work at the Wuhan Respiratory Coronavirus Lab. How did this happen? And they're like, a pangolin kissed a turtle. And you're like, no, the name of your lab. If you look at the name, show me your business card. Oh, I work at the coronavirus lab in Wuhan. Oh, because there's a coronavirus loose in Wuhan. How did that happen? Maybe a bat flew into the cloaca of a turkey, and now we all have coronavirus. Like, come on.
Wait a second.
What about this? Listen to this.
Wait a second.
All right.
John.
Oh, my God. There's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, oh, I don't know. Maybe a steam shovel mated with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory. Maybe that's it.
That could very well be, and Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins and NIH have said, like, it should definitely be investigated.
Don't stop with the logic and people and things. The name of the disease.
Wait a second.
The building.
Wait a second. But it could be possible. You could be right. It could be possible that they have the lab in Wuhan to study the novel coronavirus diseases because of the bat population there.
I understand. It's the only place to find bats. Austin, Texas has thousands of them that fly out of a cave every night. Is there a coronavirus, an Austin coronavirus? No, it doesn't seem to be an Austin coronavirus.
Yeah, and Jon Stewart's like call out here of like obviously it was a lab leak. It has aged so well because now there's a report that the 3 people with the earliest cases of COVID were gain-of-function researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in November, specifically in 2019, Bin Hu, Yu Ping, and Yan Zhu. So we basically now know it was a lab leak. And Jon Stewart called it when the left crapped, and you could see like how uncomfortable Stephen Colbert is, like when he's doing this. Stephen Colbert is like, "This is off script. Go back to the script." And what do you think? Jon Stewart ran. Could he be basically?
Yes. No. He would clean up. He would do incredibly well. Yeah. He would catch the center back, and he's just so relatable. Yeah. He's the ultimate centrist vote. And that's what a president needs to win.
Not as interesting. He did a video recently for like Apple TV about like pro-child transition and everything. Like
what? Really? Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, he's pretty captured by woke, but he at least fights back sometimes.
Yeah, well, I don't know though. If he's for youth transition, here's the thing: is I was listening to some people talking about this, and they're like, how come so many centrists were voting for the left? And a realization that they had was that a lot of parents are seeing just how much at the level of their own local schools youth gender transition is taking place.
And they're like, sorry, you said voting for the left.
Well, they would otherwise have voted for the left.
Yeah.
But then they're like, I just don't want my kid to go through youth gender transition. So this has gone too far. And there aren't enough people who care about trans rights enough to put their kids at risk when they don't think their kids really are trans, but are going to be forced essentially to transition through social pressure and so like it just went too far. So I do think that if he was into youth gender transition, that would be a step too far. Because I think that's one of the key things that pushed people to the right.
Supported it aggressively.
Ooh.
So be aware of that.
To be clear, I am not saying I think it would be a good thing if Jon Stewart was running on the left. I think it would be a bad thing because he would be such a good candidate, but he is not actually like fully sane. He, again, like the use gender transition stuff, which again, for people who don't know why we're so against this, if you look at the study from 2023, gender discontentedness and nonconforming use, what you see is of 11-year-olds who do not identify with their birth gender, over 9 out of 10 of them, when not given gender affirming care, end up affirming totally with their birth gender by the age of 23. So it's just like a bad idea, especially when you consider that 50% of people who transition, or 45%, depending on the study you're looking at, attempt to unalive themselves. So it's one of those things where it's like horrifying that anyone could promote this if they have actually looked at the data. And I feel like he has. I feel like what Jon Stewart does is he looks at the issues that he knows are going to be overturned in the near future and then stakes out on front of that, like the Wuhan lab leak story and stuff like that. And so I think that he's sort of the perfect poison pill to the right now. And to me, that scares me about a Jon Stewart candidacy. But if I'm just out here giving like honest advice to the left, this is what you need to do. You need to do somebody who clamps back occasionally.
Now, then Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is my...
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
Dwayne "The Rock"
I
Johnson.
still think Jon Stewart would do better. I think that he could moderate his positions on things, and I think he would if he was running.
He could, well, and he could come out to be like, I was wrong. I didn't know about the WPATH files. I didn't know about this and that. Like, I'm willing, because he's the kind of person who has the ability to draw the narrative of changing his mind without looking like a flip-flopper.
Yeah,
because
and I think that
we have this whole history of him.
Like, oh, JD Vance, you can't trust JD Vance because he changes his mind when he's presented with new evidence. It's
So
like
people, I think people like that, and I'm glad that we've come to a point in human civilization where we start to respect people for changing their mind when presented with new information. Wow,
I
it only took us 2,000 plus years.
I was taken in by the urban monoculture for a while. I believed their bullshit for a while. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, totally. Same.
I just as JD Vance did. I do not besmirch him for, if he's a wealthy VC in Silicon Valley in the, early 2000s. Of course.
Yes. Whoops. Sorry.
Whoops. He made a mistake. I made a mistake. Okay.
Yes.
Some of you guys realize this shit before I did.
Exactly.
But I'm out now. And so whatever, right?
Yeah. Don't hate me for being wrong. And that was one thing that when I was running for office, I got the most appreciation for was that I had grown up with one ideology and I saw what was wrong with it and I changed my mind. I wasn't questioned for it. I wasn't called a rhino for it. I was, I mean, maybe people hated me behind my back, but at least to my face, I was given the impression that people appreciated that what I cared about was my community and that I believed that something was for the best. And when proven that it wasn't, I changed my mind.
Yeah. So next here, the other big thing, and when people are like, how bad has wokeism gotten and how much it's a pushback now? Because I think that people don't understand the systemic privileges that some people are getting in our society, that we really are living in a racist society where some ethnicities and some groups are treated as having more human dignity than others. But the tide is beginning to turn. So prominent theoretical physicist Lawrence M. Cross spoke about the notorious DEI practice. He said, quote, "Get the DEI out of science funding, Elon!" ! End quote, in a National Post article. So we are now seeing mainstream physicists. So here's a classics professor, Jake, and I thought that this was a really interesting tweet that I read. He said, "I'm 53 years old. The last 4 years amount to the most repressive totalitarian era I have ever lived through. If the, quote, if the general atmosphere of fear we live in as a people who want to speak and live freely, if all of that change in American society had the fingerprints of a particular leader on it, that leader would be fascist," end quote. And that was from Nam Durham. But it was not a particular leader, it was the left. And I think what he's talking here is this mimetic virus that we've talked about that is wokeism, the urban monoculture, which the left needs to distance itself from if it's going to win. It needs to quarantine. It needs to call out as being bigoted, which is what it is. But he goes on to say, it was not a fascist leader, but a society-wide culture of totalitarian intolerance that made me watch my words like a hawk for half a decade. It was fear of retaliation from the left that made me lay awake at night, terrified that a student might have misinterpreted something I said in class and initiated a cancellation campaign against me. And this is something we've seen historically. If you look at the pogroms against the Jews and stuff like that, they don't know if they've triggered some like, oh, now they're going to use this to argue against my community. Oh, now they're going to, then he goes on to say, it was not a fascist leader, but a left-wing culture of retribution in the face which tenured faculty and college administrators cowered. No, in the face of which tenured faculty and college administrators cowered. Wielded by 18-year-olds that ended the career of a colleague of mine because she read out loud a word in an anti-racist comic book. Yes.
Oh boy.
A student with the complicity of an entire college staffed with cowards whose fear was nonetheless rational actually ended her career for reading an anti-racist comic book. It was not a fascist leader, but a left-wing culture of fear that generated countless whispers among faculty in the halls of my college and others. Every professor afraid to tell but their most trusted colleagues about how students had stood up in class and accused them of quote-unquote traumatizing or quote-unquote harming them for teaching basic facts or for failing to teach the subject from the now mandatory ideological perspective of Afro-pessimism, or teaching material unobjectionable just a few years ago that was now, quote unquote, white supremacist. So Afro-pessimism, I had to look this up, is the belief that basically all of Western civilization should be understood from the perspective of oppressing Black people. Or
what? That just doesn't sound fun for anyone.
I personally know artists whose careers and businesses the mob attempted to destroy because they did not post a black square on Facebook in 2020. I personally know musicians who lost their bands and music career merely for revealing that they were reading a book that had been effectively, quote unquote, banned by the left. And it's like, you can't even read books. If you have touched anything that may be a threat to the mimetic virus, they isolate you, they quarantine you. The only way to fight back is to quarantine the people who are doing this. They need to be treated the way the right has treated racists, because they are just as bigoted, if not more so, honestly. Because I've talked to the left wokies and I've talked to the right racists who, like, we have quarantined. And I'm like, if there's an innocent person being victimized here, it's much more on the right. Because a lot of these people who sometimes get caught up in this are often pretty innocent of a lot of the charges that they're accused of. But on the left, they're not. They do wish to dehumanize other people. They do wish to ruin people's careers, like fascists would, like, you know, if you read something like The Red Scarf Girl, like the Chinese youth would during the Red Revolution. And then he goes on to say, I know of accomplished leaders in the world and arts and culture who lost their careers because of the statement of solidarity with BLM that they wrote was not vociferous enough. I know of physicians who lost important positions, were subjected to star chamber proceedings, and whose words were scrubbed from the internet merely from suggesting that socioeconomic conditions and not the phony construct of quote unquote implicit bias were responsible for racial health disparities. I know of a liberal gay Canadian educator who had served children selflessly for decades, who was driven to suicide after being derided as a racist in front of an audience of all her peers by a DEI trainer in a COVID-era Zoom call. And you know this stuff is real. Anyone who's seen this knows this stuff is real. They're driving people to suicide. They're driving families to kill themselves. They are evil in the extreme. They need to be treated like people with swastikas tattooed on their foreheads, because that's what they are when they spout this stuff, when they try to isolate people for this stuff.
Really
None
terrible.
of this repressiveness, this intolerance, this insistence that only a single view was acceptable on pain of cancellation, along with the fear that it all generated, was imposed by a fascist leader. It was imposed through the distributed channels of individual agents converging on an ideology and a set of practices to enforce it. It was imposed by all the individuals and institutions whose rational self-interested fear made them turn their eyes away, allowing it all to happen and tacitly endorsing it. And I cannot but include myself in this indictment. All of us, like Peter Thrice, denying the Jesus of our colleagues, friends, and family in order to save our own skins from the mod by falsifying every last one of our preferences. There was an entire class of people who genuinely never felt a moment of fear from their neighbors, students, colleagues, or acquaintances, who sincerely never did notice episodes of retribution and cancellation, such as I have described here. My theory is that these people's own ideology so mirrored that of the dominant social configuration that they simply never experienced a moment of friction. And it's not, for the most part, that they previously arrived at a quote-unquote woke ideology independently and then merely recognized fellow fellow travelers in other wokists. Rather, their minds were such as to instantly and uncritically conform themselves to whatever it was that they were supposed to believe or endorse this week. From abolishing slave patrol policing in America, to mass graves of Indians in Canada, to human biology having no bearing on a person's sex or gender. They were and remain in the grip of a mass delusion. This is by and large the same class of people you will see commenting here and telling me that none of this ever happened or that I have fallen for a right-wing lie. Some of these people will make a faulty inference from this and assume that I am a hardcore right-winger. In a classical case of whataboutism fallacy, they'll say, well, what about Republicans? And they'll accuse me of carrying water for the right wing and supposedly far more repressive of any leftist or Democrat than I aspire to be. And we all know this is true. Right-wing people do not. Leftists don't get fired from their views from their jobs. They don't get fired for their views from their university. They don't have to live in fear.
Well, I think what you're pointing out, though, is that they do, that nothing's enough.
Well, they do it that nothing's enough, but they definitely, it is not the right that controls society. The left is the fascist faction controlling society right now. They are fascist in the truest sense of the word. Mm-hmm. They are a fascist mob that is interested only in upholding its ideological purity spiral. But to continue, even dumber, they'll say that my supposed experience of intolerance is exactly what bigots should expect. If I have views that were impossible to express on campus over the past years, that's just as good, for entails that my views must have been beyond the pale, and no campus is obliged to platform or tolerate Nazis and their ilk. And here's what I point out with John Stewart going against all this, because he had the platform to do it. You would have been deplatformed for saying, oh, we actually do need masks. Or, oh, we actually don't need masks at various different times. As happened, you would have been deplatformed for saying, actually, these COVID restrictions are hurting minority communities disproportionately, as happened to the person who was runner-up to be the CEO at Levi's. Him saying stuff like the lab leak thing had people's careers ended who weren't far enough left. Mm-hmm. We all saw this. It's not that they were fighting for truth and justice. They were fighting for ideological conformity. They were fighting for the March step. They were fighting for their North Korea-like dictatorship. These inferences and accusations are all false. I can be angry about left-wing repressiveness and still be plenty alarmed by right-wing repressiveness. And indeed I am, but the right wing have done nothing. He's just signaling here. I have spoken out on this platform against Florida's Stop Woke Act, for example, against the crushing of pro-Palestinian speech on some campuses. And just this morning, I shared my well-grounded fear that Trump will end up invoking the Insurrection Act. What? That's so pathetic. But there is simply no equivalency between the impact on my quote-unquote lived experience, and they will deny all of these people's lived experiences, of the daily grinding paranoia and fear that the leftist culture of repression has created for me, that I have seen it create in countless students and colleagues, and my more abstract and theoretical concerns about repressiveness are right, that is in any event more local to Florida, Texas, etc., not nearly as global as the society-wide leftist culture that I describe here, and I will not be gaslit. And this is a reality that so many people are experiencing. And if you as a leftist can't read this and say, I need to stop the bigots who have taken control of my culture, who have taken control of my party, and are using it to advance their agenda in the same way the right-wing party did. See our video about why the racists turned on Trump, why the homophobes turned on Trump, why the anti-Semitic people turned on Trump. Because they all did. They all denounced him in this last election cycle. They all said he doesn't stand for us anymore. They all said anyone who follows me, stop voting for him. You need to do the same on the left. And if you can't do the same, you will keep losing, and you will become an increasingly irrelevant part of America, even if you control the boards at these large companies, because nobody's going to buy these video games anymore. And we're seeing this, and these companies will collapse. Nobody's going to buy your products anymore. And we'll get better at organizing, and we'll get better at identifying any organization you have your hooks in. And here I'd point out, we're going to start a website and a company called antibigot.com. And I want people who are interested in their companies, and they go, I want you guys to come in like a DEI remediation force, like anti-Sweet Baby Inc., and clear up all of this. And then talk to your friends in right-wing media. Make sure everybody knows. So like when Harley Davidson has a problem, they can come to us and we can clear it all up for them, clear all this out, and then make sure that through the real media channels, the channels that people actually watch. Here, I'll put a thing of the top 10 podcasts right now. Nobody actually watches left-wing media anymore. They're shouting into an echo chamber. Yeah, they control, quote unquote, the parts of the old bureaucracy, but nobody consumes that. Nobody plays those games. Nobody listens to that media. As we point out that Simone and I individually, I guess together, our podcast in terms of watch hours per month, we get the same amount of watch hours as 14 New York Times journalists. If you watch our Nobody Goes to the Mainstream Media Anymore. 7 for each of us. That's what we're worth in terms of our pundency. That's getting insane. Anyway, thoughts, Simone?
I don't have anything to add.
Well, I mean, am I right? It's like, are you seeing this? Do you think that like this is what people's lived experience is?
I think that there's a small and very vocal online group of people that has successfully lived under this delusion that has been reinforced by what we describe as the mainstream media that shares that delusion and lives in that isolated sphere. And that the rest of the world and people who are interacting with reality more just don't see it. And that's why the left lost. And you can see this in the audience numbers, as you point out, that this group is very much in an echo chamber and they all kind of consume their own stuff, but the rest of the world isn't consuming it at increasingly alarming numbers, right? The attrition is really high because as they're consuming it, they're seeing this is not reflected in my reality.
This is a great point I want to add here. You don't move in the other direction. And remember when I predicted Trump would win by a large margin in this life cycle and everyone's like, you're insane for saying that. And I go, I know people who've moved from the left to the right in the last election cycle. I can think of nobody but Dick Cheney who has moved from the right to the left.
That's because, the leftist takes now increasingly don't reflect reality. And after a while, you have to draw a line and say, this no longer represents my understanding. And I'm getting the fact that I'm being lied to and gaslit, and I don't want in on this anymore.
Is it the left controls people through years of indoctrination, through building fear in them and their families and their companies and everything like that? All the right needs to do is at one moment, oh, the right's really not going to take away all my rights. Oh, Trump isn't an anti-abortion candidate. Oh, he's not going to force me to like breed. He's not going to re-enslave Black people. He's not going to take away gay rights. He's not going to, like, the moment you realize all of this, you're like, wait, I was brainwashed into attacking somebody who was my greatest ally.
The money goes to a good cause. What good cause? A drug, a mind control call. We take your babies.
Yeah.
And I think now you have a reality and an anti-reality party. And actually, this has created a really interesting phenomenon on the right, where the right has moderated on tons of issues because they're no longer interested in promoting any sort of policy or anything like that agenda. They're just interested in governing the country as sanely as possible. And at the individual level, letting people live their lives the way they want to. And I think that's what things like J.D. Vance represent. And I think that's what people like the new right represent. It's this collection of clans all working together. And I think that I really like this new right, which is only allowed by the leftist delusion on the other side.
I do too. But what you've given me hope about today is that because the left has been so resoundingly destroyed and trounced in this latest election, that at least in the US, there is a chance of rebuilding fresh in a much more moderated and reasonable fashion, like devoid of this caricature of the far left that they had previously elevated. And
well, it's funny that you mention this. I've actually seen a lot of left-wing influencers say this. They go, I found myself relieved when Kamala lost by a huge margin.
Well, it's a chance to rebuild. And I think that they would be great to see that happen. And I think we felt at various times excitement about the prospect of the Republican Party rebuilding. And that's part of the reason I think why the Republican Party won so resoundingly is that the rebuilding has begun and people like what they're seeing as the new future. GOP Inc. wasn't selling. Now the new right is selling. People are excited about it. And the left can do something similar, obviously in its own way, but it can do it. So I like that. And now we have to make dinner for the kids. Would you like me to make you those vegetable wontons that you liked me making last week?
Those are spectacular. Yeah, that'd be a great dinner. I'm not that hungry tonight. I'm like a 3 or 4.
You'll eat a lot more than those because they're quite small, but I'll make you those. Would you get the kids now? I'm gonna change Indy's diaper and then I'll go down and start dinner and you can take a break while I watch them. Sound good?
You're very special and I love you and you do so much for this family.
I love
What
you
else
too,
are you gonna
Malcolm.
make me than those?
Huh?
What else are you gonna make me? You said I'll make you a lot more than those.
No. I'm just gonna make you. You said you wanted 3, but they're like minuscule.
No, I mean
in
I with a
size.
3 out of 10.
Oh, your hunger is a 3 out of 10. Okay, understood.
Love you.
No problem. I love you too. All right, you're gonna get them now, right? Inside here, I just hit record. That mother that I respect and adore me how most kids' sports these days, you can't really get kids to just play in them dabbling. Like you kind of almost have to go professional to be involved, even just with soccer, aka football, that everything sort of gets escalated quickly to a semi-professional level where you have to take them to tournaments and it's a whole family traveling. You need to buy all this equipment. And I think it's so indicative of the way that we raise kids in developed, wealthy nations, especially the US, where there's this expectation of overinvestment. And because parents have so few kids and kind of feel like they have to spend way too much money on them.
Yeah.
Like, well, like they're because they keep buying it, the industries then keep building out this professionalization, which isn't going anywhere. But then parents start to think, well, but if it's built out this way, then I guess it's important for getting them to college or something. And then I think it's this system that they buy it, so it gets built out more. And then because it's built out more, they buy more. And then it just sort of keeps echo chambering into this completely ridiculous, overblown youth sports industry that makes it unsustainable for any parent of a large family to ultimately get their kids into sports because they can't afford to.
And we won't be doing it with our kids. I'll have my kids compete against my brother's kids.
Yeah.
They've got a big family. We've got a big, we'll have enough for a sports team on both sides.
Well, no. I honestly, really, I just want, Indy, we're across the street from an amazing gun and archery range. I'm just going to get our kids super into archery and they can go as far as they want with shooting. Yeah. Well, you have to be above a certain age and I want to start our kids early. So,
okay.
So archery starting at like age 6, I think is their lowest age or something. And then just, and obviously they can start younger at our house. And then like, I think that's kind of what's like hunting, fishing.
Yeah. We have
shooting.
enough property to create a good archery range for the kids.
They can use the monster wall. They can just shoot the wall. We can put targets on it. So we should do that as soon as they're old enough. Anyway.
All right.
I don't know. Can you please tell me?
It's a Kit Kat bar.
Oh, Kit Kat bar.
Do you like Kit Kat bars? You have like a weird candy mustache, buddy. You look very grown up.
Okay.
Whoa.
Red.
That's red.
Red? Oh, yeah.
Do you want to pick out some candy for Titan?
I just don't like candy.
You don't want candy? Do you want to pick out some candy for your sister?
Can I see the